Hello, and welcome to an episode of the Constitution Study on the Road. That's right, I'm on the road today. I want to take some time and just talk off the cuff, no notes, just what's been on my mind lately and what we may be doing with the Constitution Study. If you are new to the Constitution Study, well, thank you. I hope whoever recommended you or however you found out about us, hope you will thank them for it. We are very much interested in your opinion. So please head to the website, constitutionstudy.com. If you're a returning guest, hey, thank you for coming back. We really appreciate that. Also, head over to constitutionstudy.com. Leave a comment, ask a question. You can go to the show page. Probably won't be any notes in there unless something pops to mind. I have to go find a link. But ask a question, give us a comment. Let me know how I'm doing but I'm really looking for questions. It's June, which means the Supreme Court is releasing a lot of opinions for the more controversial, shall we say, cases. So I've got one I've already done. I've got a couple more in the works where I'm actually looking at the opinion that was written, not what people are saying about it, because it's one thing we'll find out is what a lot of people say isn't necessarily the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But I'm also looking for questions. Am I explaining these concepts and ideas properly? Are there questions people have about the Constitution they'd like to hear me discuss and review? When I had the Constitution study back up in New York, that was the best part. It's one thing to read the document and to see what it says. We'd often get the question, well, if the Constitution says this, why do we do that? But the best questions were, I don't understand. What is this? I just wrote a piece, I think it was last episode, on the Contracts Clause and how the Supreme Court basically completely whiffed their interpretation of a case based on the Contracts Clause. Contracts Clause is a fairly obscure clause in the Constitution. It's not something we talk about. It's not something we think about a lot, but it's an important part of the Constitution. Are there questions like that you'd like to have answered? So please go to the website, again, constitutionstudy.com. On the menu, you can see where you can ask a question. You can also follow me on Facebook. What I put on the website also shows up on Facebook if you prefer to follow there. If you sign up for the mailing list, I will let you know as new things come out. I'm not doing a newsletter unless, again, you would like that. If you would be interested if there's enough interest in a newsletter or something like that, I'll be more than happy to work on that. See how that works into the schedule. Right now, it's for announcements. I'm actually trying to set up a couple of speaking engagements. Gentlemen that I've gotten to know fairly well, we're fast becoming friends. Is very interested in what I'm talking about in the Constitution study, and he's asked me to come talk to, of all things, his car club. It is relatively local to me, so we're going to work that out. Also, I'm talking with someone about speaking to the Daughters of the American Revolution. Little point of fact, I knew about the organization. I didn't realize that in order to be a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, you must be able to trace your ancestry to someone who actually fought in the revolution. I think that's kind of cool, and there may be some interest there. I've contacted my local county school commission to see if I can help out there. So things like that. If I'm going to be doing events, if I'm going to be doing something new, that's what the mailing list is for. Now, if you sign up for the mailing list today, you will get a free copy of my essay, How the 16th and 17th Amendments Destroyed the Republic. Pretty evocative title, I believe. But it's interesting because we don't talk much about the 16th and 17th Amendments, but they are important. They weren't thought to be very, very important when they were first adopted, first ratified by the states. But as so often happens, we never think of the logical outcome, the logical consequences of the decisions we make. So 16th Amendment, where we instituted the income tax, and we allowed the federal government to tax income of any sort, that anything they can legitimately call income, they can tax directly, meaning they don't have to apportion it to the states. It doesn't go through the states. The states have nothing to do with it. And while it was originally thought of as simply a way to fund the government more efficiently, it changed the relationship. And that's kind of what the essay goes on to discuss. Same with the 17th Amendment, where we went to the popular election of senators. It changed the relationship between the states and the federal government, the 16th between the people and the federal government, and it has dramatically changed how the republic works. And in many ways, I believe, destroyed the republic. The idea of a federation of sovereign states that have a organization that works for them to do things that are not efficiently done individually. This idea of federalism is pretty much gone. And there's a shell of it, there's a shadow of it, but it's not really effective. And I think that's part of the reason why people don't think much about the Constitution, because they don't see it being in effect anymore, because we've changed those relationships, and now we ask the federal government to do everything. We don't care whether or not the federal government is even allowed to do a thing. I was talking to my sister earlier this week, and the question came up. We were talking about PBS and why every time you turn around, they're begging for money. It was because her point of view is because, well, their funding keeps getting cut. Well, they shouldn't be getting funded by the federal government anyway. The federal government has no constitutional authority to set up media. In fact, they're supposed to be out of the media business. They're not supposed to be in the media business. But see now, well, okay, well, we like having this, and we don't actually want to pay for it ourselves. We want someone else to pay for it. And then we end up with, same thing. It would be a nice idea. Gee, wouldn't it be great if we had this public radio, public television? Wouldn't it be nice if it wasn't run by mean, evil corporations? Not realizing, well, then you've got the government determining what goes on those stations and what goes in that media. And is the press really free when it's getting funding from the federal government? As you can see, today is going to be kind of a bounce around whatever's on my mind as I'm driving at the moment through the state of Virginia. I want to go back. I am looking for questions. I'm looking for things that you would like me to discuss on the podcast or answer on the website. I do have some things in the works talking about the Fourth Amendment. I've been writing the chapter of the book on the Fourth Amendment and discussing things like the third party doctrine and the civil asset forfeiture laws. So that may turn into an essay. I'm still debating that, but I'm looking for feedback. I'm looking to understand what it is you'd be interested in. I do keep track of the numbers, and hey, the Constitution Study podcast has been on a little over a month. Probably by the time this episode airs, it'll be maybe a month and a half since the inception of the Constitution Study. And I'm getting, decent numbers. I mean, not as much as I would like, more than I feel would be the worst case scenario. And so people are at least downloading it once and listening to it. I'm curious as to what you'd like to hear more of. Do you have questions? Do you have ideas that you'd like me to spend a little more time on? So let's see, what else is on top of my mind? I talked about speaking engagements. I want to start looking at speaking engagements. I actually enjoy speaking. Those of you who don't know me personally, I love to preach. I'm a part-time preacher. In fact, at the moment, I am preaching every other weekend in my home church. I do like getting up in front of people and talking, which makes me, I guess, weird, because most people are afraid of public speaking. I enjoy it. Most people run from the opportunity to speak in public, whereas I run towards it. So if you are in the Middle Tennessee area and you would like to hear more, please let me know. This is still fairly new. The podcast has been up a month and a half. The website has been up a few months. I've been working on the book for close to a year now. So I'm I'm still willing to try new things and take suggestions. One thing I recently added is a Patreon page. So if you go to patreon.com/Constitution Study, or you follow the link on the webpage, I'm looking for sponsors. And the reason's quite simple. I have a full-time job. In fact, I have a very busy full-time job. And this work that I'm doing is extra. And I'd like to do more, but not in a spot where I can do that. So what I want to do is I believe in trading value for value. I'm not looking for handouts. I'm not looking for gimmies. I've made a commitment that if I get 100 patrons on Patreon, that I will start doing a web series. I will figure out a way to do the Constitution Study online, where people will be able to participate, similar to what I did back in New York, and probably have recorded versions that people can go back and follow. Of course, and again, I have other ideas. If you have an idea for something you would like to see me do, if I can come up with the funding stream to do it, um, again, I'm more than interested in ideas. I find the Constitution study itself, I find it very exciting, and I'm looking forward to what can be done. I'm looking forward to the day when I can dedicate more and more time to it and less time to making sure the lights are on and the bills are paid. So, as I said, I've got a couple episodes I'm working on based on Supreme Court decisions, Supreme Court. Um, I don't want to call them rulings. They're not rulings. The Supreme Court doesn't make rules. The Supreme Court doesn't make law. The Supreme Court, even saying it interprets law, is iffy. I mean, what the Supreme Court, in fact, what all courts are supposed to do, judicial power as it was defined in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, is the application of law in the decision of controversies. So the idea being is you have two or more people or groups that have a conflict, a controversy. The court is supposed to look at that controversy, look at the law, and apply and make a decision about how the law applies to this specific case. I recently did one, as I said, on the contracts clause, where the question was, could a state law modify the beneficiary of a life insurance contract based on some major life event, not based on the requests of either the parties to the contract? And the contract clause clearly says no. The Supreme Court says, sure, it can. Just make it up as you go along. And most people, this probably wasn't heard much about in the news. Most people blew it off as something technical here, but it's really important to understand, if your contracts aren't contracts, if they can be modified by the state based on their whim, their desire, how can you trust a contract? How can you be sure that your contract's going to be enforced? How can you be sure that when you go to another entity and say, well, we have a contract, oh, well, the state has passed a law and it's changed? These types of things are destructive to a rule of law environment. And we keep treating the Supreme Court as this super legislature. They decide what the law is. They decide how it's applied. And they're not even bound by the basic black and white text of the law. Interestingly enough, you look at the Constitution, and the Constitution, when they refer to the Supreme Court, the S in Supreme is lowercase. The court's name is not the Supreme Court of the United States. We keep hearing of SCOTUS, which is an acronym for Supreme Court of the United States, but that's not its name. It is the Supreme Court as opposed to inferior courts. It's a court. It's established by the Constitution as the body that hears cases to figure out how that case would apply under the law. But the Supreme Court does not decide what is and is not constitutional. We let it. I mean, let's be blatant. We let them do that today, mostly because, well, either we don't know or we don't care. The Supreme Court is bound by the Constitution. The problem is our elected representatives, our congressmen, do not hold the Supreme Court or any court effectively to account for its bad actions, its bad decisions. You know, if you get away with something often enough, you figure, well, that's your right. And that's kind of what's happened to the court. But before you go blaming your congressman, let's face it, we don't hold them accountable when they don't do their job. And that's a lot of what comes out of the Constitution study. When we had the study back in New York, and people would say, well, what do we do? The answer is we have to take responsibility for our decisions. The people in Washington are elected by us. They are our representatives. They work for us. But they act like we work for them, and we act like we work for them. Is there any reason why you'd be surprised that they act like we work for them? When was the last time you contacted your congressman and said, hey, this judge did something blatantly unconstitutional? And trust me, it doesn't take long to find terribly blatant violations of the Constitution. And you say, if you don't hold them accountable, I will find somebody who will. If you won't uphold your oath of office, I will find somebody who will. And then do it. Tell them, I don't care how much money you promise to bring home. I don't care about your promises because you're lying most of the time anyway. If you're not going to uphold your oath, I will find somebody who will. That may mean some of us who really don't want to be in politics. And trust me, I would be a bad politician. I might be a good statesman, but I'd be a bad politician. And I say might, I don't know. I've never been a statesman. But I don't want to play those games. I don't want to be beholden to donors, whether they're individuals or special interest groups. I don't want to be beholden. I don't want to play the game of spending money to get a committee position. I don't want to do that. I would be no good at that. But if we don't hold our elected representatives accountable, if we don't make them pay for their bad deeds, why would we expect them to hold others accountable? If we want to see a change in this nation, the change has to start with us, and we have to recognize it's a long, long game. This centralization of power started more than 100 years ago. The 16th and 17th Amendment were passed in 1913. That's 105 years ago. And that was the outcome of decisions made in the late 19th century, the late 1800s. If we're not going to hold them accountable, then you know what? We can't complain when they do exactly what they've always done, and we've never said no. So it's been a bit of a ramble. Tell me if you like it. Let me know if you like this more off the cuff, off the top of my head type message. Please swing by the Constitution Study, constitutionstudy.com. I'd love to, again, get questions. I would love to get feedback. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. I'm also up on Libsyn if you prefer to go there, or you can get it through the website. Please visit the Patreon page. You can see what my goals are and what you get for being a patron. I like this patronage idea as a way of supporting these types of projects. So again, let me know. Should I do more of these? Should I never do this again? I hope you'll let me know, and I hope to see you again at the next Constitution study. Thank you.